Getting the motive for those deadly attacks, but the tragedy makes a few points pretty clear. One is that terrorism comes in many forms, from Muslim militants overseas to domestic political extremists. Another is that Norway is not used to dealing with terrorism on its own soil. The suspected gunman managing to fire a full 90 minutes before he was confronted by police. It took teams 45 minutes just to arrive at the island where the shooting was taking place. How do you fight this sort of thing? Here now is Whiton, former State Department senior advisor and a principal at D.C. International Advisory. Is it your sense that they just were not properly prepared for this kind of thing?
That's right, Greg. You've heard the term the exception that proves the rule. This wasn't Islamic terrorism. It's one of the first instances since Oklahoma City when terrorism on this scale was not Islamic. But steps you could take to defend your people and your government and your society against Islamic terrorism would also come in handy against lone wolves, as this is turning out to be. It just looks like the Norwegians didn't happen to take them, nor did they approach terrorism in what, frankly, was a serious manner, I'd say.
Yeah, Islamic terrorism is a problem in the Scandinavian countries. Were they just sort of turning a blind eye to it?
Yeah. At the end of the Bush administration, George W. Bush went up to the UN, his final speech there on the critical threat from Islamic terrorism. And the current Prime Minister of Norway, Jens Stoltenberg, actually took the occasion to criticize Bush for going up and said, gee, you mentioned Islamic terrorism all these times, but you didn't talk about climate change, as if there was some sort of equivalence. A problem in a lot of European countries is they think by being neutral in the war on terror, as if any civilized society can be, that they won't face the threats that we face. But, that's just not true. We do know Al-Qaeda and the Islamic terrorist movements are targeting Scandinavian countries just like the rest of us.
When you were a diplomat, you traveled to Oslo, and what did you see in terms of physical restraint against potential terrorist attacks?
Right. I was surprised, actually, when I was there, which was long after 9/11. It was actually last part of the last decade, and was surprised that, you can't harden every target, but surely you should harden the most sensitive targets, where your head of government, their prime minister, works, where their head of state, the king, lives. And neither of those appeared to be particularly well hardened against what is a fairly obvious tool of terrorists, car bombs. Ever since Oklahoma City, everyone has known the threat that was posed by these. That's when we closed Pennsylvania Avenue permanently to through traffic to defend the White House. Why that wasn't taken, why that step wasn't taken. And Oslo, it's not really a time for finger pointing,
Sure.
But as the Norwegians move beyond the shock and start looking at policy, they may want to pose that question.
Let me broaden the discussion. The killing of Osama bin Laden has certainly hurt the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization in Pakistan and Afghanistan. But Anwar al-Awlaki is alive and well in Yemen, and he is planning additional attacks against Americans. Is the franchise there now the lead in al-Qaeda, and how dangerous, and what can we do?
All right, well, Al-Qaeda is somewhat diffuse, and the Islamist movement, the terrorist movement, more diffuse still. So Yemen is a very fertile ground, and yes, it does seem to be emerging as quarters of sorts. It's fertile because it's falling apart. Yemen as a unitary state doesn't really exist right now. It was always an iffy topic when it had a president, but it essentially doesn't right now. So Al-Qaeda finding an open door. And, this ought to be a reminder. President Obama came out and said the tide of war is receding, but no one gave that message to Al-Qaeda or the other Islamist terrorists, and they are using this time to regroup. We had a threat come out of Yemen, the Christmas Day bombing, not the one on the Northwest Airlines flight, but the one that was using FedEx and other express shipping toner cartridges to hold bombs. So, this is an ongoing threat that we're going to need to be fighting for a long time, unfortunately.
Speaking of terrorists, let's talk about Libya and Muammar Gaddafi, who now says he's willing to talk to America, but he refuses to give up his position. So what's the point of talking to the guy?
Right. This war's been going on for 5 months, and really from the beginning, people have said that Gaddafi is either close to losing or close to making a deal to leave power, to leave the country. But frankly, it's just a bunch of games. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but you cannot predicate your strategy on the notion that Gaddafi will leave power. The avenues to him going somewhere have been closed off, in part by the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which has threatened to indict him. But, for an administration that came to power talking about about exit strategies and the need to have them for any military operation. This administration doesn't have one, even though some could exist in regard to the war in Libya in which we are engaged.
Christian Whiton, great to see you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg.